guys, this sequence is one of my favorite yoga sequences to do for the hips, and it's all about circumduction of the hips, so utilizing all the ranges of motion in different positions against gravity, and it gives you a really well-rounded workout around the hips and sets you up for a nice practice following. So if you're doing hip openers, or you're doing a lot of standing work, squatting, any kind of positions that might feel a little bit like you need a bit more space and a little bit more integrity in that hip joint, this is a great place to start. Some yoga based, some more mobility based. All right, so first position, starting off with your standing hip circles. We'll start with these and we'll end with these. Hands on your hips. Try and keep the rest of your body still as you take one leg out in front. Turn into external rotation and cross the midline into adduction. Raise this leg up as high as you can, and for the first one, passively find your, find your passive flexibility. Okay. Standing hip circles, starting and ending. Okay, first round of standing hip circles, 4 repetitions each, and I'll demonstrate 2, and then of course you can stop and replay the video. From here, take weight onto one leg, nice and strong. Start with your hands on your hips, and then bring your leg forward. We're going to keep this knee bent. Turn at the hip into external rotation, move it across the midline into adduction. You're going to raise this leg up, and for the first one, grab hold and pull the leg up as high as you can, finding your passive range of flexibility in around your hip. Then that's the idea here, is that you want to keep it here, communicate it deep into your hip to give you that hold, let it go, that's your start position. Hands wherever you want them to be. I'm going to keep them on my hips to try and give me focus of keeping my hip bones facing straight ahead without them turning. Take it into abduction out to the side, keep it high, as high as you can. From there, turn into internal rotation, which is right at the hip joint here. The thigh goes inwards, the knee turns down, the ankle goes up. Start to push back into hip extension, and then lower the knee down in hip extension. Reverse, push back without that happening, so this stays steady. Then here, you're back in hip extension. You'll feel the hamstring, the butt, probably firing off around about now. Then what I want you to do is turn into external rotation. So the knee goes up and there's this rotation backwards and outwards. Take it up as high as you can and then back down. Side view. Same thing. Repetition 2. Cross the midline. This time take it up. Use your muscles here. Inner thighs, of course, also working as high as you can. Abducting out to the side until you hit that sticky point. If you find that the pelvis, the hip bones want to move back, guide them back with your hands. Find your limitations there. Work within that range as you turn the knee down, ankle up. And you'll see here when I push back, I'm avoiding going into like the Nasaranjasana dancer's pose. Keep everything steady and just see how much hip extension you've got at your hip. Lowering down. Reverse. Push back. Circle. And down. All right, 2 more times actually. We'll follow through. We'll go 2 more times up. And reverse. Balance, concentration here. Of course, the standing leg is also doing a lot of work, and around the foot especially, trying to keep your balance. Think about not wrinkling and stretching the front of your top or the back or the sides. Everything stays as still as possible. And you'll get a little bit of core work happening in there as well. All right. Changing sides. Come to the other side. Other leg comes forward. Hands on the hips. Leg forward. Turn. Cross the midline. Pull it up. As high as you can go. Aiming to make that your start position. And then we hold. Take it out to the side. pushing back. Keep pushing back as you lower a knee to knee. Reverse, back, external rotation, closing into adduction because you're coming towards the center line. Lots of hip flexion and down. Go to the side. Up. Great time to do this or set up when you're first starting to do these is to actually do it in front of a mirror if you have the access. And then you can see if there's any compensations going on through the rest of the body. You might see here I'm starting to move quite a bit of my standing leg, my hip. You want to omit that and really focus on that isolated movement here. This is too challenging and balancing. Holding onto a chair, holding onto a wall, holding onto a pole is always an option, and that is going to give you a really good isolated feeling while you build up the control and awareness around the hip joint. It's quite a challenging one to start with, but we'll also finish with that, and I want you to feel how the quality of movement and the range of motion feels within your hip. Maybe it feels quite clunky and rigid, right? You might feel it's not as smooth. What we're aiming for is you want to eventually just be like, hey, that's a really buttery feeling. It's a nice smooth sensation of congruency in the hip joint. And of course, every time you do it, you're going to be touching on maybe new ranges, especially if you do this sort of every day. So there'll always be some sort of sticky point, but essentially, if you video yourself, you'll notice a big difference. Okay guys, hip circles number 3. A pillow or a block underneath the head. You're going to have another block here. I like to use it just to push against so my arms aren't going to move. 90 degrees, chair position with your hips and your knees there. Top leg comes up. Different relationship to gravity now. All right, so from here you turn into internal rotation. Push back, lower down. Behind the hip bone if you can. Push back in space like you're pushing a wall away. Turn the knee up to the ceiling and back. And sorry, I forgot the first part. We're going to come forward. Do apologize. Up, 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 up. Turning in. Hi guys. Hip circles number 3, lying on your side. So side lying. Take a block or a pillow underneath your head. Take another block or something that you can push against to keep your shoulders stacked and steady. Hips and knees 90 degrees. Rather than being here. Yeah. Bottom leg stays steady. Here we go. Top leg lifts. Pull it as close towards that block in between your hands as you can. Deep hip flexion. Lift up into abduction. At this point, what's available is that internal rotation. Push back in space. Push into that front block so you're not rolling back. That's the key there. This hip bone in front doesn't move. Lower it down a little. Tap the floor with the heel. Push back. Good. Work into external rotation as you come up and back down. Here we go. Forward. Up. Turn. And lower. Push back. Heel down, knee up to the ceiling. And return. Good. So the reverse of this would be starting back. Taking up. And forward, back, up, and forward. So just those 2 variations. All right, changing sides. And once again, do as many reps as you'd like, maybe up to 10 to 15. Or you could just be doing a few like I am if you're running through the whole sequence. 90 degrees, here we go. Look forward, deep hip flexion. Hip flexion, abduction, as far back as you can. All right, controlling it. Internal rotation, hip extension, lowering down. Hip extension, pushing back. External rotation, knee up, ankle down, so there's a rotating outwards. Pulling it up and continuing the circle. Now focus on keeping the waistline steady, block in between your hands steady. You'll feel the core work way more here as you isolate that movement at the hip. Good, starting off on the reverse, pushing back, up, and down. Push it back, up, and down. Whew. All right. So that's a fantastic one. Do a few more than I've done in this demonstration and hold something. It doesn't have to be a block, just to keep everything steady and focus on trying to keep your hip bones stacked and trying to avoid rolling back. Once you roll back, that means we've lost the control within that hip joint and everything's kind of moving as one, the pelvic bones and the hip bones. You want to keep this steady. That means actually physically holding your hip bone. You're more than welcome as well. Okay, so that's side lying hip circles. Exercise 2 in hip circles, coming down onto all fours and onto your forearms. Same thing. Knee bent. This time we're going to further bend the knee into the deepest knee flexion that we can, which is going to omit any movement through the knee joint and just focus on the hip. Strong core, strong position here. Take the leg up as high as you can. Take the knee out to the side, external rotation at your hip, lower down, hip flexion, adduction. Repeat. Up. I'm going in the same direction. I'm going to go 4 in each direction, but of course you could do way more than this. And reverse, pull forward. Try to avoid rounding your back here. Good cue is to reach the tail to the back of the head in resistance. Out to the side, quite a lot of abduction. Up and down. Notice the difference here, guys. Different relationship to gravity. Here you're working way more into your hip extensors, the back, but hamstrings a little bit more to push that leg back up towards the ceiling against gravity. So it's a little bit more hip extensor focused. If you have tight hip flexors, one more time. If you have tight hip flexors, it's a nice one to actively open up through the front. Change sides, come to the other side. All right, heel to bottom, squeeze it in, lift up, and out to the side. Helpful cue here to keep your trunk steady. Make wrinkles across the whole front part of your top, and focus on both sides of your waistline. Whatever fabric you've got going on there, saying bunch free. So if you watch me now, we avoid this happening. Yeah, all of this movement around the trunk. Last one, and we're going to reverse it, and I'll give you another option here. If you have a block, you can also pop a block on your lower back and try and keep that block steady as you go for the reverse. Forward towards the hands, out to the side, up to the ceiling, and back down. Once again, feeling much more of the work, the effort into the back of the hips, the side of the hips, and much more of a stretch opening in the front of the hips. Last one. And release. So that's your 4-point kneeling hip circles. Wonderful way to work against gravity and create a little bit more space in the front of the hip, a bit more hip extension as well as the rotation. So creating more space once again in the hip joint. Go for 10 to 15 reps to really get some good quality movement going on. Okay. Okay, so now we're coming into downward facing dog, single leg dog. And I love this one. It's another variation of doing hip circles. Okay, exercise number 5. 3-legged dog, hip circles. Find your downward facing dog position. Set a strong foundation with your shoulders. Step your feet together. Take your first leg and wrap it behind the other leg, working into adduction as far as you can. Just watch that the waistline isn't bunching. Yep, try and lengthen the waistline on both sides. Here we go. You're going to keep the leg straight, guys, and take the leg up to the ceiling. Hip extension, quite a lot of hip extension. Then you want to rotate. The knee moves out to the side, and then you sweep that leg forward, as far forward as you can without rounding your back. This is quite a long lever now, so it's going to take more effort to reach that leg up and down. Notice how much more range you can get now in your lift. To note, if this is too strong, bend the knee. Continue with bent knee. However, following on from our single leg circle that we just did in exercise 4, it's really nice, especially for that length of the hamstring, to create these. All right, changing legs. Other leg changes over, and note, you'll see my waistline is bunching here, so lengthen it, and here we go, up. Another variation with this, if you feel like you're really wriggling a lot in the trunk, is to shift more forward with the chest over the thumb line, slightly into a more of a plank position. That will give you a little bit more steadiness and ease. Obviously going to be some shoulder and core work in here. I'm going to go back to my dog. Last one. Enjoy this, guys. Enjoy this wonderful feeling of control and mobility around the hips. All right, so that's obviously quite a strong one. You're on your hands. Again, if that's too strong, another variation. If it's too much in your wrists, but you still want to get into this, you can also be, here's a variation on your forearms, not having to use the wrist a little bit higher up. Or like so. Note, this is going to be still a little bit more work in your shoulders, but you can practice at this range without using the wrist joints. It's just as tough though, and around here and then around the shoulders. One of my personal favorite exercises, poses to do in yoga. All right, exercise number 4, supine hip circles, a traditional Pilates exercise. This is going to work more into your hip flexors, into circumduction rotation. So from here, I like to use a block. I'll show you that on the second leg. A little bit steadier, drive your arms into the floor, other leg stays anchored, and you raise this leg up. Try and keep your lower back smushed to the floor if you can, yeah? So if that means that your hands are underneath your back, that's quite a nice place to start. From here, you cross the midline, you let the hip lift off, so we want to get a little stretch here, and then you lower it to the other leg. Once you hold in this position, that leg is floating, both butt cheeks stay anchored, you sweep your leg out to the side, circle it back, and continue. So now you're going into more hip flexion controlled rotation. You feel it deep in here, you feel a little bit of your abdominals, and you're focusing, easy cue, nice controlled, smooth circles on the ceiling, the reverse of course. And what you're aiming for, guys, is to avoid, if you have a look to the camera, is avoiding this, that rolling off center, yeah? We want to control it, isolate the movement in the hip. Last one. And change. Making it a little harder on yourselves with the control. Squeeze the block, don't let the block move as you let that hip lift off. Circle down, up. Good. So there's always a few different ways that you can take it. I'll give you another variation. You could push that block behind you, drive the block into the floor, anchor the mid-back and shoulders down. And that's going to help you recruit a little bit more into here as well. Change. And that's a really nice feeling actually. It's not really about the hip, but it's a nice feeling of having that control in around your center and focus on pure hip rotation. Last one, take it up. And please note that hip clicking is quite normal as long as it's not an acute pain. You can always start off, guys, just so you know, with the knee bent. If that straight leg hasn't worked for you, shorten the lever and go for this one. So there you have it. There's your supine hip circle, so it's more of a hip flexor focus. All right, guys. So now that you've done those 5, come back to standing and come back to our original exercise, the balance single leg hip rotations with a bent knee. So from here, crossing the midline. Hands can be wherever you want. You can just do exactly the same thing that you did at the beginning. And let's go. Take the leg out. Take it out to the side. Turn it. How does that feel? Push it back. Lower it down. Repeat. Hopefully feeling like there's a slightly smoother, congruent movement. Maybe you can access a little bit more of that space in the hip joint and a little bit more control than when you first began. Try that on the other side. For the video, I'm going straight to the other side, but of course, please do more on that same leg. The more you do, of course, the better, because you're going to get more work and you're also going to get more communication to the hip. So rather than just a few reps that I'm demonstrating, stay with it until you actually start to feel some significant changes happening. Once again, I said about 10 to 15 reps. It's definitely feeling smoother for me. I hope it's feeling smoother for you. Note this one, if you wanted an even further challenge, you of course could do variations, almost like your ballerina, where you're working into a straight leg. But for now, keeping the knee bent just isolates it at the hip. So, those are the 6 exercises. Essentially, you've got your 4 in the middle and then your 1 on either side, which is your comparison. And you can choose any which order that you prefer, but that's the way I usually like to start. I hope you enjoyed. Love your feedback, so comment and I will answer your comments. Thank you.